Good morning. Now, I've been asked to do a recording in which I go through this poem by Paula Meehan called A Pattern. It's a really fantastic poem. It's a very long poem, but I want to try and boil it down to kind of the fundamentals, okay? So I'll go through it pretty quickly as I can. So it's a poem about death and loss. It's a poem about the connections that we have to our past. It's a poem about love. And of course, primarily it's a poem about the poet's mother. It is a very thoughtful, reflective, personal poem, so therefore typical of poems like Heart Lesson or Buying Winkles or Cora Auntie by the same poet. And it also is a poem which makes some commentary about social issues, particularly the status of women. It's a deeply moving and beautifully crafted poem. But anyway, most of the time when I say things like that, you don't care. So what I'm going to do is just boil down to what you want to know. The opening is engaging. Little has come down to me of hers. So straight away, there's a sense that the person she's talking about, we know it's her mother, has passed on, and the poet is thinking about what connects her to her mother. And what connects her to her mother are physical things. 3 physical things: a sewing machine, a wedding band, a clutch of photos. Now there's an example of what we call triadic structure. Those 3 items are of symbolic importance to the poet, presenting them to us in that clutch of 3, excuse the pun, that clutch of 3 really has an impact. It's easy for us to absorb that number of details and think about the significance of them. Then we have the juxtaposition of those kind of fond memories of love that we see are very important as the poem goes on, with the reality that not all relationships are permanently harmonious, that there's often conflict in a relationship between a parent and a child. And we see that in this fantastic juxtaposition, the sting of her hand across my face in one of our wars. Now that's reminiscent of the line from Heart Lesson, when the poet described herself as a child crouching by the fire as Zeus and Hera, her parents, battle it out. So her childhood was a time of love, but her childhood home was also a place of conflict and a place of violence. And that use of that verb sting really does communicate that sense to the reader very powerfully. As the poem goes on, we see the poet really delve into these thematic concerns to do with love, loss, and regrets. She describes how, I wish now she'd lasted till after I'd grown up. We might have made a new start. So that is entirely personal, but absolutely relatable. We all live with regrets. We all lose people that we love. There's often that reflection that, of words not said, or maybe of words that were said that are regretted. And there's a lovely honesty, a confessional tone, that, as you know, makes all personal writing compelling and interesting to read. The poem is built around a number of small anecdotes, short anecdotes. One of the most important is the image of her mother working, doing that domestic work that women did in the time of Meehan's childhood, and that often went unappreciated. And for me, the image that captures it most of all is she'd scrubbed the floor with Sunlight soap, an arm reach at a time. Now it's an incredibly vivid and kind of immediate image. I've written down some of those words that mean when you read it, you can see it. Immersive, cinematic, immediate, evocative. And there's even this idea of that imagery being provocative. And that goes back to a previous question, which has caused so much discord among students since it was asked on a Van Boland a couple of years ago. And what I mean is the idea of her being down on her knees scrubbing the floor. Is it designed to provoke us to feel something about injustice? Is it designed to make us think about the value of the work that this woman was doing, which maybe, as I said a moment ago, is taken for granted because it's domestic work? The choice of the verb scrub, the sibilance of sheet, scrub, sunlight, scope, bringing a real bringing a real focus onto that line, I think is important. And I as I'm always saying to you, personal writing, any form of writing that requires authenticity, requires attention to incidental details. And there's a great example of it. The description of, the mention of the soap, the brand of the soap was Sunlight Soap. It brings that sense of authenticity, that sense of realism that we associate with Paula Meehan's poetry and with all really, really good personal writing. In the next stanza, and I apologise to Paula Meehan and to all of you who love this poem for skipping through. Again, I'm trying to get through this as efficiently as possible. In the next stanza, there's this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful moment which makes us all think about connections, between us and those who have gone before us. She remembers her mother scrubbing that floor to such a degree that you could see her face in it. It was like a mirror on the floor. And then she says, when she looks at the floor physically in this story, did she net a glimmer of her true self? In other words, when she looked and saw her reflection, did she see who she really was? And then there's this really, really, really mysterious question. Did her mirror tell what mine tells me? And the poet doesn't tell us what her mirror tells her, but you get the sense that there's a melancholy to that line, there's a sadness to that line, there's a pathos, and all those words mean the same thing. Go for the middle one if you want to that line. And maybe for me, anyway, and I'm allowed to interpret, maybe for me it's a sense of a life left unfulfilled, that there she is on the floor, scrubbing the floor, looking at herself in the mirror going, this isn't what my life was supposed to be like. This is not how I imagined myself when I was young. And that's quite moving. And again, I have to tell you folks, for a lot of people, when they reach a certain age in their life, that is a familiar feeling. My favourite part of the poem comes in the following stanza. It is just an example of why Paula Meehan is one of our great writers, and hopefully, will be recognised as such a long time into the future. Look at the line in the second line of the next stanza. History has brought her to her knees. Now, if I was going to learn one line from this poem, that's the line I'd learn. It is emblematic, provocative, thought-provoking, interesting, and we don't know exactly what she means, but we can certainly interpret the imagery. To be on your knees is to be subjugated, is to be brought down, is to be made powerless or impotent. And that's what the image suggests. And when she says history, is she talking about the fact that she's a woman? Is this Meehan, bringing up issues of gender and how women are mistreated, and especially if they're poor? So women who live in poverty, are they inevitably going to be brought to a position where they are, effectively domestic servants, who are, in her case, in Catholic Ireland, having babies until her body can't take it anymore? Was that her fate? Or was this the particular circumstance that the personal history of this woman, Paula Meehan's mother, and her, a relationship with her dad, which we'll find out later on wasn't good, and her relationship with her husband, which we know was both loving but also quite fraught. Whatever it's the broad, the gender, the social, the political, the related to poverty or wealth, or the personal circumstance, there's a sense that the poet is looking at her mother and feeling, my God, your life was hard, your life was difficult. And yet then, and this is the bit I love, yet then, the memory that the mother was capable of such kindness. She'd call us in and let us skate around in her socks. It's one of the great lines, and for me, again, it's emblematic of the fact that poetry doesn't have to be complicated. The language, doesn't have to be complicated. This is, of course, complex, subtle, nuanced, clever, intelligent writing. But the language doesn't have to be complicated. Look at that line. She'd call us in and let us skate around in our socks. What have we got? 4, let me count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 words. 12 words, 13 syllables. Monosyllabic language, creating this really, really, really immediate image of the kids having great fun, sliding around on the floor in their socks. These kids who have no money and don't have all the privileges that you have. But this was a fun thing that she let them do. And they took it seriously. And Meehan creates this really clever simile. We'd grow solemn as planets in an intricate orbit about her. And it's so vivid, and you can see it, cinematic. She's on the floor, and the kids are moving around, sliding around her really seriously. But of course, that image of her being the sun at the center of their galaxy, the source of the light and the heat in their lives, the person around whom they revolve. Wonderful, wonderful image. The poem, as I said, is built around a number of anecdotes. The next one comes here where she remembers her mother working on a sewing machine by the fading lights to remake an old dress for me. So again, domestic work. Again, scenes of poverty, trying to repair a dress so that her daughter can wear it. But for me, again, an act of love. The woman must be exhausted. She's a parent to young children. She's out down on the floor, scrubbing the floor all day, but she stays up late. And I think the image of the light fading, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it's emblematic for me, or symbolic, or representative of the idea of, the mother's trying her best, but she knows it's not enough. And it brings, to bring happiness to her daughter. And it brings up again that idea from Heart Lesson, of her throwing the meagre amount of money that the father handed over on the fire and saying it's not enough. Anyway, the image of love. What do parents do? They try their best for their kids, knowing that they can never really do everything to bring happiness to their kids' life. And there's an example of that. The next stanza, again, I'm gonna finish up now in a second because we're getting to the end, is where she tells the story. The mother tells the story about when she was going out with her Paula Meehan's dad, and the granddad found them and was very, very, very angry. And there's this line, "I needn't tell you what he called me." And of course, you know what that language is. Meehan doesn't use it, so I'm not going to use it. But it's a special type of language that women are subjected to by men when they're being accused of behaving in a way which is socially unacceptable with a man. And again, it brings up images of gender, it brings up ideas of injustice, it brings up ideas of unfairness. It's a really striking moment in the poem, which is so personal. But remember, Meehan is a poet who writes poems which also make social or political statements. Think of Death of a Field. Think of the statue of the Virgin at Granard Speaks. Think of a prayer for the children of longing. So when you're preparing Meehan's poetry, be able to talk about the political as well as the social commentary as well as the personal insights. There's that line, great line, again, it's love, it's what every parent feels. The mother tells a story about the father being her father, the granddad being a violent man, but the mother says, "It'll be over my dead body before anyone harms a hair on your head." And that's a great line, again, that idea of the mother was a loving woman, but she was a fierce woman too. She was tough, and she'd stand up for what she believed in. The last part of this section, I'm going to get to the end of the poem now, that I love, is the kids going to school. The mother is poor, she's struggling, trying to keep going. But she has the 3 copybooks. They're on the table, and there's a bright bronze nib pen and St. Christopher strung on a silver wire, little symbol of hope, because the child is going to go to school, and the mother wants the child to go to school with everything that she needs. Why does she need to do that? Why does she do that for her child when it'd be easier just to lie down because she's knackered and tired? Because she's a mother, and she loves her child, and she's devoted, and she'll do everything that she can to give her child what she needs. And it's just, that's what being a parent is. The most moving and probably the saddest part of the poem comes at the end, in the third major anecdote. So we have the anecdote of the mother repairing the dress. We have the anecdote of the mother scrubbing the floor, and now we have this anecdote of a photo, and it's taken in the Phoenix Park. She's alone on a bench surrounded by roses. And then there's this image of her wrapped entirely in her own shadow, the world beyond her already a dream, already lost. She's 8 months pregnant, her last child. And there's this idea of, this image of, it is an image, it's a photograph, of a woman defeated by life, worn down by life, worn down by repeated pregnancies, worn down by poverty, worn down by hard work, worn down, worn down. And that symbol of her wrapped in her own shadow is a great metaphor. The repetition of, already, because she was so young when she died. She was in her 40s. Her mother was when she died. It's Paula Meehan doing what she does in Cora Auntie, when she talks about Cora, the old woman with the, what was it again? The bottle of morphine in one hand and the bottle of Jameson in the other. It's a celebration. There she is saying, look, my ma mattered, and my ma's life was difficult, but I'm going to record her. I'm going to record her, all of her qualities, her determination, her hard work, her devotion, her fierceness, the fact that she died a broken woman. There's a sadness there. The poem is called A Pattern, and at the end of the poem, she comes back to the mother knitting, or the mother making clothes at home, a knitting pattern, something complex and something difficult to create, but something of importance that can be followed. And the poem ends with this image of the mother saying, one of these days I must teach you to follow a pattern. There's no doubt whatsoever, folks, that is a metaphor in the poem. What Meehan means by it, you can read all the books, all the textbooks that all the authors have written where they tell you what it means. Paula Meehan might tell you what she means at the end of it. I just always go back to what Elaine Quillinan said when I asked her a question about what a line meant, and she said, I'm not quite sure what I meant when I wrote that. And sometimes you have to allow yourself to interpret an image. Here's what I think it means. I think when Meehan looks at her own life and her own self and her own being and her own personality and her own mistakes and her own successes, I think she looks at her mother and she knows that that's where she's come from. I think she understands that pattern of her life was set by where she comes from. And I think that is a wonderful thing, but I also think it's quite a moving thing, because maybe Meehan is talking about some of the suffering that she's experienced in her own life, some of the disappointments that she's experienced in her own life, and maybe there's a sense of repeating those mistakes as well, I hope, as a celebration of who she is, because she also has some of the qualities that her own mother had. So I was asked to do a recording to explain the poem, The Pattern. I know I haven't done it any justice. I think it's just a magnificent poem. I find it moving myself. I hope you find that useful. Have a lovely day.